Guardians and Ghosts. Welcome back. Am I on? Hello? Is this thing working? Okay. Anyway, so it is Thursday. It is the morning of Thursday, West Coast time. And I am Hako, artist poet on PlayStation 4. Go ahead and hit me up if you want to play some Destiny or Conan or Minecraft. I just downloaded the Final Fantasy VII Remake, and I'm having a lot of fun with that. Took a little bit getting used to with the semi turn-based attack mode. Also, the fact that there was more button control involved, not just straight commands like there was in the original game. Overall, I think in terms of what constitutes as a remake, this is actually really good. This is, by and large, a far better experience so far. I just played the first chapter than my original experience in Final Fantasy VII, way back in the golden days of PlayStation 2. And I'm thinking about the fact that, I played the whole game. I played it on, I think I played it on normal mode, like I'm playing this one now on normal mode, and it was just so I can get the narrative. See, most single-player games that I played back in PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, and also, obviously, on, the earlier consoles, Nintendo 64 and stuff like that, were all severe. They were like narratively anchored. They weren't they were narratively driven. They were story driven. They were story anchored. There was single character focus. You played as a character. You did not create a character that you got to play as. Like in Destiny, technically you play the Guardian. Your name is your gamer tag from PlayStation Network, which I've always thought was kind of like, it'd be nice to name our Guardians different names, but this kind of feeds into my whole macro theory of what Destiny truly is supposed to be and where they're trying to get us to be gradually, because Destiny 1, we all understood, those of us who have followed the story of the studio and the development of Destiny itself, understand that it turned into a very quick, hot dumpster fire mess, with creative differences occurring within the studio. And anytime you have what was relatively at that time a very niche, kind of smallish studio, although Bungie was never really a small studio. But when you have a story department that is fairly nuclear in terms, that you're going to have it either clicks so well that all the ideas are permitted and nothing is wrong, as the Assassin's Creed would say, um, or you're going to have continuous friction, because there'll be one person who thinks that the story needs to go a certain direction, or there'll be limitations placed on the story, but versus what the engine can handle, and what the scope of the game is meant to encompass at the time. And so it seemed like Destiny 1 was always pushed out a little bit early. Um, I would have been okay with another year or two of development waiting for Destiny to be fully polished. A good fallback example of this would be Cyberpunk 2047. Basically, the new Cyberpunk game. CD Projekt Red made some really broad boasts and claims. They had some engine test footage that was all run on a dedicated, isolated server, so there was no real stresses on it. And Cyberpunk was not meant to be a multiplayer game anyway, but the scope of the world and the interactivity of the world was such that it really did require it to be far more robust of an engine. And that's really where the problem comes down to. The engine couldn't handle the code that they wanted to put in, and that was the issues there. And then I think a lot of Destiny 1 suffered for the same reasons, is that the engine they were using, or that Activision put them on, I guess. I don't know what the real logistics behind that is. Like I said, I'm just a layman looking inside. And I know enough about things like game architecture and server structure and how players interact with each other. I know enough to realize when something's wrong, or something's like one of the pistons isn't firing quite cleanly enough, or there's a tire was installed without proper balancing. But and how many other automotive with the transmissions grinding on sawdust. Destiny 1 was definitely, it always felt like a used car with a transmission case chock full of sawdust. if anybody knows what that means. Um, oh, sorry, that allergies. My neighbor's lawn care is just going full bore this morning, and yesterday morning was our apartment's gardeners going full bore. So it's like, tomorrow there'll be more gardening done across the street. So I'm like, I gotta hide out, Corona or not. This is the way I lived all the time. But anyway, so yeah, Destiny One's content was awesome for what it was at the time because Destiny itself was something that was somewhat different. No, I wouldn't say it was unique. There have been many of shared world shooters in the game in space long before Destiny, um, but it did offer something that was tantalizing enough that it got copied almost immediately by Warframe and then eventually by things like Fortnite and Anthem and stuff. I don't think Fortnite has super abilities though, but Warframe did. But again, running the story, being a narratively driven game, I don't feel that Destiny truly is a narratively driven game. I think, and I've said this many times now over the last few broadcasts, or I should say journal entries, because this is kind of really what they are. Destiny feels like a mobile game. It feels like one of those games you load up on your tablet or your phone or your Chromebook and fart around with when you've got other things you're doing, but you just need a little extra distraction to kind of bring in that zen kind of feeling. And Destiny is such a game that you don't really need to be totally present for. You don't need to be completely attentive to. I mean, when you're doing the raid or the trials or the Iron Banner, then you probably want to go ahead and keep a focus here and there. But the content is such that if you're a regular player like myself, I can play. I have the privilege of being able to play daily, and as much as 2 to 3 hours a day if I so choose, because I am a work from home artist. Artist poet. I play games like I like games like Destiny. Be more clear here. I like Destiny, but I like games like Destiny because I can drop myself in a holding space or in a public space for a few minutes at a time while I take care of things, and then I can come back with all stages. Because what I do is I paint and I sculpt, okay, and I do also write some verse here and there, slogans and logos and stuff like that. So what I do really in the sculpting and the painting part really only takes about 5 minutes roughly between steps. And then it'll take upwards of a half an hour to an hour for stuff to cure. Um, Now, when I'm working with hot glue, not so much, and then I will not be playing Destiny, because everything just hot glues right together really fast, and then I prime it or touch it up or whatever, and then there's the lull while I wait for those steps to start. And yes, once upon a time I used to have a production line going because there was also lots more demand because we had public spaces into which my artwork could go. Now, not so much for reasons. Um, but back in Destiny One, I did not play Destiny One near as much as I have played Destiny Two. I don't think I should look that up. There's a there Tisking. I'm sorry, tutting is such a I don't know what is worse, or either you sound like a chanting monk or you're clicking like a beetle. So I don't know. It's probably better not to even do any of that altogether. Maybe get some water. That might help. But anyway, let's see. Submachine guns, auto rifles, and a sword. Do I have an auto rifle on this inventory yet? No, I definitely don't. So, yeah, Destiny 1's always kind of felt a little bit half-made. Um, excuse me. Oh, well, that was going to happen. And I'm not too upset about that. It was still good fun. But Destiny 2, it has. Well, see, I don't know. In Destiny 1, the campaign was such that you had an end goal. You had an end game. That the end game was defeat the Black Gardens, the heart of the Black Garden, and stop the Vex from summoning the darkness into our world or empowering themselves from the darkness. And that narrative thread was picked up in the Taken King and in the Crota storyline and stuff like that, where it was revealed that the Vex encountered the Hive, examined the Hive, ran simulations of the Hive, and then eventually found their purpose, or a new purpose, according to further lore books down the line of Destiny 2, wherein they began to worship the darkness, or a version of the darkness, um, that they felt the Vex are emulators. They're mimics, and how they how they play into the so-called the garden game played by the light and the dark. Um, have some ideas about it, but it's okay. And see, now that's the thing, is that Destiny 2 leaned heavily into the speculative narrative part, and while it's lots of fun to go ahead and have that in the game, ultimately you kind of want some better direction. You kind of want things to be a bit more on the solid side of the game world, the universe building. Um, you don't want to leave a lot to ambiguity. That's not really how you should run your story, so to speak. Now, there's a big difference between hiding the monster for most of the narrative as opposed to throwing it out there in the first scene. Um, then of course obscuring a plot to the point where the only way people learn about it is by character exposition. A plot should be apparent through the scene, okay? Or in the case of books, you should be able to pick it up just in the context of the story or the writing or the narration. Narration is not exposition in the technical sense, although it is a source of exposition. But if you're narrating in a story, you shouldn't have your characters doing exposition. If you're having characters doing exposition, then you shouldn't be narrating so much over that. And Destiny is not narrated, obviously, um, but there is a lot of exposition in there. And as such, it's kind of like, it's okay to have that, but then also at the same time, you kind of want some mystery because that's what helps move an interest in there. The more there is to discover, the more players, the more people, more the audience is invested. Um, we have a current MacGuffin right now, which is, well, it's kind of not really a MacGuffin. It's more about, like, I guess you could say it is a MacGuffin because the actors here really care about it, but we as the audience, the players, kind of really don't, and that's becoming a chosen of the War Council, or disrupting the War Council's recruiting. I guess, I don't know. I mean, MacGuffins don't really need to be part of a story, but Destiny is basically a fetch quest type of game. When we take a look at their quests here, you can see that for the the short and simple of it all. For instance, like these things here. I have to get the gold to put it in the hammer so that I can go break the chests, so that I can go ahead and get loot. I mean, if you're a shooter looter, you're essentially a fetch quester. You're shooting enemies to fetch items, and yeah, I think honestly, it's not a good point for narrative, but I can see where it might be a good framework. It's just not supposed to be what drives the game, that drives the story. Destiny really doesn't have that very cohesive of a story. There's a lot of plot holes in the strikes. There's a lot of plot holes in the seasonal activity. I mean, we've got Crow here in the helm, and we've got Crow on the reef. Well, we know this is a different Crow
Wish there was more
because
we could do.
this is Crow with a mask. And by the way, this is not technically a social space because while we can't shoot things, we can use our double jump, which is interesting. Which means, to me, makes me believe that there might be something around here that'll eventually show up that we're going to want to take a look into. And because I mean, what other point would there be to have the double jump in this space when you don't get double jump at the tower? You know, I bet there's something back here that's going to open up. I think that's the elevator to the tower, but whatever. Then you have these things down here, which lead to the hangar. Oh, wait, did this? Was this? Is there more access? This was just a plain door last week, I think. Wasn't it? Wasn't this just a plain doorway? Like this one? Huh. Well, whatever's. So, that's kind of what I'm doing. Yeah. Now, there's supposed to be a new gun coming up for the for Gambit, which of course I'm not going to be able to do because I'm on restriction. And yeah, thought for the day. They cost $30. Get yourself the Wi-Fi. If you're stuck on Wi-Fi, if you've got no real other options, and you got to do the Wi-Fi, I highly recommend getting a range extender. My connection has been so freaking good. Um, it's the only time I actually ever experienced any kind of latency is during the high traffic play times, which, on holidays and school breaks seems to be pretty much around between 11 and 3 p.m. But during school times and non-holidays, it's about 4 o'clock on. And I don't typically do high-end activity after 4 p.m. I don't prefer to. I know a lot of my fellow players in my clan and in some friends groups, uh, they can only get on after 5 or 6, and I'm like, okay, yeah, if you want to play, I'll play, but for the most part, I'm not really gonna. But anyway, what was I going on with this? Oh yeah, thought for the day. Thought for the day is that if there's a tool available and it's going to improve an experience, then you should do it. You should just go ahead and get it. Especially because with Destiny being peer to peer, the better my connection is, the better the game state is, the gameplay is for everybody else. And that's true. That really is true. And this is why I got restricted, is because my account was constantly being kicked out of activities. Now, granted, like I said, because I do work from home, a lot of times I get pulled away from the game because I have to go, mitigate something that's happening, uh, whether it's my professional or my personal elements. And, IRL always takes precedence, and Destiny needs to understand that. Bungie needs to accept that. So I don't typically invest in long-running activity unless I know I've got the time to invest. And, that's why I liked activities like Battlegrounds. I liked activities like Gambit. I liked activities like Crucible because I'm guaranteed to spend no more than 12 minutes or so in a game mode in an activity, because Crucible ends in 12 minutes regardless, unless it's mayhem that's a little shorter. Okay, we're gonna have some fun with that refresher. Just wait that master. Wow, that guy is just getting shredded. They are just super energetic today. I can't get up there fast enough. Can you res him? Awesome. Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat, I didn't really care too much about the story because the gameplay was engaging enough and the story didn't really mean anything. But, oh shit, not yet!
You're going to face heavy resistance up ahead.
Remember, do not hold back. Show your enemy no quarter, as they did to us in the Red War. Now, begin the rite of proving. Show them what we're made of, and leave them trembling. I was wrong to sit out the fight against Dominus Gaul. The Iron Lords would not have left enough survivors to allow the Cabal to rally. This isn't the Zavala I know. He was a fighter, a survivor. The city has made him soft.
He's a politician first and a soldier second. This is a war. One wonders if it should be led by warriors.
I misjudged you, Osiris.
How so?
When I heard of your exile from the city all those centuries ago, I assumed you a madman and a fanatic, a heretic at best.
Am I not those things?
You are. But had the city not cast you out, we may not be in the position we are now.
Perhaps I was wrong, too.
About?
You. You are a man of great potential and clear thought. In times like these, we need that clarity.
So there you go. It's a pretty good example of what I was talking about as far as why I enjoy doing these small, quick, quick play kind of activities. It's not that I don't have an interest in doing raids or Grandmaster Nightfalls. It's a lot of times I just don't really have the time to invest in those kinds of events because they do take forever. They are quite extended material. But again, thinking about content, there's lots of content in Destiny, but what is the end game for Destiny? What is, well, narratively, story-wise, excuse me, the last chapter is a final confrontation between all the forces of light versus all the forces of dark. That's what this has been building to. Lightfall, of course, would imply that light actually loses. And if we believe contemporary astrophysicists, there will be a heat death in the universe. And when they say heat death, that doesn't mean that everything gets cold. Neil deGrasse Tyson recently just did a YouTube, his Star Talk, talking about the difference between temperature and heat from the perspective of a physicist. And we know that physicists have a understanding of the cosmos. They're the ones investigating the mechanics of the big game, as you would probably want to say. And what heat is the collective potential energy, the collective energy of a system. Okay, and he used the example of the ocean versus a cup of coffee. A cup of coffee is hot by temperature. It is hotter than the ocean. It is got more temperature than the ocean because it is the average energy taking off of those particles. Whereas the ocean has more heat than the coffee because it simply has more volume. It has more particles contributing to the total value of energy in the actual system. The system, of course, being the ocean. So that's why when they say the heat death of the universe, they're talking about where all energy has more or less been expended, which, in my view, in my understanding of Einsteinian physics versus Newtonian physics and contemporary cosmology and all that, that energy cannot be destroyed, but it can only be transmuted. It can only be transferred from one system to the other. And if the universe, if the cosmos is in itself the entirety of a system, and they're saying that eventually the last star will burn out in our cosmos, the universe will expand to a point where there will be no more ways to transfer the energy. The energy would just go into stasis in the voids between planets and stars and things like that. And then, like I said, eventually the last stars will burn out or blow up. This is supposed to be the heat death of the universe, where it just gets into this everlasting state of entropy. And the Bungie has taken that concept and made it the darkness, has made it the hive. The darkness themselves don't ever talk about entropy. They're not the darkness themselves do not pursue a state of decay, a state of no growth, a state of no motion, a state of stagnation. Um, they are basically just the counterpoint to light. Whereas light is set up in the garden of the game, in the game of the garden, you have the gardener and you have the winnower. The gardener plants, prunes, nurtures, harvests. The winnower just clears out. When you winnow a garden, apparently, you just tear it all out, kind of just rip it all up. But you do so to clear the way for more garden to happen. When you think about terms of grain harvesting, you have the farmer who, plants the seed, grows the seed, nurtures the plant, and then harvests the plant. A lot of times there's a stalk and root system left. The winnower part of the game would be coming through and tilling that all into the soil to create new energy for more crops to grow. So both are necessary. You can see it in the terms of environmental biology. You have producers and you have decomposers, and then both are technically there's consumers also, but the two main forces in biology are there are the producers, those who produce foodstuffs for other things to consume, and then there are the decomposers, those who get rid of the systems or organisms that no longer can contribute to the production of resources. So when you think of the terms the light and the dark, the light is the producers, whereas the darkness is the decomposers. And what happened is that the hive, according to the lore books and everything, saw this decomposer as being the final state of all things. And they made this be, they made pursuit of the heat death of the universe their end game, their goal. Whereas our Guardian's endgame is to have the light triumph and to have humanity survive. What we don't realize is, well, it's been implied heavily in the game and has been also openly stated in a few lore books. I don't have the titles to give you, sorry. But it talks about how Rasputin shot the Traveler because the Traveler was getting ready to leave. The Traveler, the gardener, did his part. He grew life in the system. But there was a corruption in the system. And I'm not talking about the soul system. I'm talking about the system that is our soul system. There was a corruption that was growing within the Golden Age, which is the system, in the form of Rasputin, in the form of Clovis Bray, in the form of the Ishtar Collective. Things were being experimented with and things were being made, and it was the darkness, according to Elsie Bray, the Stranger, that corrupted Clovis Bray, or actually tempted Clovis Bray into exploring more of its power, with the specific outcome that it knew that creating the Exos and tampering with the Vex would eventually lead to a collapse. And that's exactly what happened. The dark ships showed up, and gravimetric waves started attacking Titan, which was meant to get rid of the Hive, believe it or not. Wherever the Hive have been, the darkness has attacked, with the exception of Earth and the Moon. So when you look at our director here, we used to have the Mars, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Mercury, Titan, and Io. The Taken, all over Io. Mercury only actually had the Vex, and technically, according to the lore books, the Vex were supposed to be the playing pieces which the light and the dark moved around in their garden game. What did the Vex serve? Well, the Vex are noted to have what is known as a pattern. As Praedyth said in his lore books from Destiny 1, the Vex have a pattern, and if something fits the pattern, it's left alone. If something does not fit the pattern, it is removed. Well, the Vex are all over Nessus. The Vex have returned to the Moon, but they're not machining the Moon. The Vex are on Europa, but they're not completely converting Europa. They're not actively trying to convert any of these remaining planets. They had converted completely Mercury. They were working very hard to uh, do stuff with. No, the Vex weren't on Titan, were they? No, they weren't. But anyway, the Darkness attacked just about all the highest concentrations. The fleet, I said, attacked the planets that had the highest concentrations of darkness in them, which is interesting because the Infinite Forest, the Infinite Forest had more heat, if you want to think of it this way, than the entirety of the Sol system and the entirety of the system combined. So the Black Fleet, the Darkness, or the Veil, as they might be called later on, I guess, um, they're they're not just hunting the light. They're not actually hunting the light, but what they're doing is that they're coming to systems that were touched by the light, that were cultivated by the light, and then they are extracting those corrupted elements. When the Black Fleet isn't, the Darkness isn't actively evil. The Darkness is not actively trying to break all things down. The Darkness is looking for a pattern. The Darkness is using the Vex to move that pattern forward. And this is why you don't see, I don't think you see any Vex on Earth. Um, because Earth fits the pattern. Earth is the pattern, if you think about it. Because what does the Traveler do when it comes to the Sol system? It tries to terraform, it didn't terraform Europa, because everybody still had to use spacesuits, but it didn't terraform Nessus because Nessus was just an asteroid. But it terraformed the moon. It tried to terraform the moon. It terraformed Venus. It terraformed Mars, and it tried to terraform Mercury. And then the Vex took over Mercury. And the Vex took over Mercury because the Ishtar Collective on Venus cracked the genie's bottle by entering the Vault of Glass. And the Vex now, is it any coincidence that the Vex have been in our system since before the Traveler arrived? No, no, because the Veil were like the Forerunners in Halo. They were all over the galaxy doing things and trying to encourage species to grow. And the Traveler was their tool. And they realized that when their machine comes through and terraforms a system and tries to elevate the species, there will be errors in the code. There will be errors in the system. Um, there's a running theory. There's a running uh, acceptance amongst the medical community, the oncologists, that every human being that's ever been born has the tendency, has a propensity, or has the potential. Excuse me, let's be more realistic here with my statements. It has the potential to have cancer. It just takes a certain number of triggers to make it happen. Sometimes it's immense sudden trauma, like a big fall or a broken limb or something like that. Sometimes it's chronic exposure to mutagens like mercury and heavy metals like cobalt and all that stuff. Um, Other times it could just be stress, which is a chronic state. So you have an acute state and you have a chronic state, and then depending on what those states are depends upon what your cancer is looking like. So in other words, if you have an acute uh, instance of trauma, like an injury or something like that, then you're more likely to develop a certain type of cancer. But like it's like it presents itself really fast. Okay, whereas a chronic exposure to mutagens or stressors will present a cancer very, very slowly. So that as by the time it does finally show up or become noticed by the patient, that it's at the point where it's even harder to get rid of because it's been pervasive in the system for so long because it's a chronic, continuous exposure to these stressors. Well, I think that's the way the light and the dark is working in terms of Bungie's world building, because that's what you're really deconstructing here. Is you're deconstructing the world building that Destiny has, that Bungie has with Destiny. And in Destiny 1, there was a very clear world building going on in the concept art and in the early stages of the development of the game and the leaks of the story and everything like that. And then the key writer decided to up and grab his shit and go. I still don't remember. I don't remember really what it was all about. If it was the fact that Activision was trying to, horn in too much of their own ideas, or it was maybe it's because the engine just could not support the scope of the game, and Activision wanted something that could be chummed out every 3 to 4 years, like most game studios will do. They will produce a new version of their title and call it 2, 3, 4, 5, or whatever every few years. It's basically the same game, but it has new chapters in it. Um, Whereas Bungie had a vision for Destiny that was a stacking kind of like an MMO kind of style, where you had the core experience that everybody can get into and do, and then you bought DLCs to add to that. And that's kind of what we did in Destiny 1 with The Dark Below, The House of Wolves, The Rise of Iron, The Taken King, uh, Wrath of the Machine, and which I think was also Rise of Iron. Siva, yeah, Rise of Iron. But anyway, so you did that in Destiny 1. You bought the DLCs and you got to explore all that stuff. But it was weird is that the content didn't cross over, didn't propagate into other content. Each of those DLCs had their own end game, and once you played that, that was pretty much it. All you did was what they called the end game activity, which is meaning that you're not actually in the end game anymore. You're just doing the activity of it. It's kind of like going to church but not singing any of the hymns, not participating in any of the rites, not contributing to any of the community, just showing up at church and kind of going through the motions, just being a presence there. That's kind of what the end game activity feels like to me in Destiny. There's because what a game does, what a game like what an RPG means is role playing game. If it's an action adventure RPG, if it's a first person shooter looter adventure, anytime you use the word adventure or RPG or whatever, um, you're you're implying that there's going to be some kind of closure. I'm boring myself in my own topic. They're implying some kind of a closure to the story, and they have expressed that Lightfall is their third expansion out kind of thing. We're going to get the Witch Queen, then we're going to get Lightfall. Um, and I don't know if there's going to be much more Destiny after that. I don't expect there to be much more Destiny after that. Bungie is working on another IP, which I think was actually going to be their full-on true MMO, which is what Luke Smith has been pining for some seasons, for some years now. And I'm all for that if it's a true MMO in the sense that it's just like the Elder Scrolls Online or World of Warcraft or anything like that, where you're actually able to openly get into quests. And that was one of the things that they were introduced with the Lost Sectors. They tried to introduce that with the Lost Sectors, is you'll be able to get into quests and things like that. But Legacy is everything in this game, and I think it's kind of poetic that the whole point behind Clovis Bray's exoscience was legacy. He wanted to extend human life beyond the limits of its biology, and the darkness gave him the opportunity to do so by tampering with the Vex's mechanics. And then, of course, introducing paracausal manipulation and time travel and things like that, which is evident in Elsie Bray. Um, is she the only person who can truly time travel in the game? There are stories of warlocks and guardians in general who are lost in time, lost through time. Brother Vance right now, technically in the Infinite Forest, whether it's been, wherever these things went, I don't imagine that they just vaporized. They didn't just evanesce out of our universe. I think that the darkness, the Black Fleet, actually quarantined them. That their influence on the system, that is the humanity system, uh, was so negative that they needed to get quarantined. And then maybe this is the narrative justification for Bungie rotating content. Um, but they can rotate all the content they want. The playing pieces stay the same. You have the Guardian, you have his armor, you have his weapons, you have his targets, and you know that is essentially the playing pieces. And it's kind of meta in the fact that the core of the narrative for Destiny is about a game that two forces are at first thought to be competitive or opposing forces, but I think it's actually a cooperative game. like some of the single player or single player co-op games, both on tabletop and in video, where you team up with another person to fight against a common enemy or to reach a certain state in the game. Imagine Settlers of Catan. You sit down with your buddies and you start off competitively, but eventually you're trading things for things. You're trading bricks for wood, or wood for sheep, or whatever. Um, the end game is that there will be one person who will be in charge of the whole board. But I have played games of Catan where we all reached parity. We all had an equal share in the game. It was like there's been one or two times where I played Go where we were at a stalemate, which tactically, which in practice Go does not afford stalemates. It's not like tic tac toe. You can't, there's certain moves where you can draw it to a cat's game, um, and so reaching a draw is what cooperative games are all really about. But succeeding, I think the light and the dark are a cooperative force, but one wants control more than the other, or it doesn't really matter. It's kind of like who's really in charge of the environment, the producers or the decomposers. They need each other. The producers cannot produce if they don't have raw materials to produce from, and those raw materials come from the decomposers who break down the system, who break down the elements that are no longer able to produce. The material gets recycled. The energy gets put back into the whole thing. So heat death of the universe, I don't think is possible because energy cannot be destroyed. It could only be manipulated and moved around into different states of matter. Uh, and so that's kind of weird when you think about it. So thought for the day: don't limit yourself to just one perspective. Don't be fooled by the narrative. Um, See this game for what it is. It's a distraction. It's entertainment. Don't get so wound up in the achievements. Do not. I mean, it's good to have goals and say, I want to play, but I want to get something done. What do I got to get done? Getting these is kind of fun and all that stuff. These are kind of in-game. These really are all of this, and all of this is all really just in-game trophies. That's all it is. It's no different than the PlayStation Network trophies that you have. It's just a way to, give you something to chase, give you something to chew on, so to speak. But if you're playing the game for yourself, you're playing the game for your own entertainment, it doesn't really matter what you're going to do as long as you're having some fun with it and you're not bringing somebody else's fun down. So, there's a true thought for the day. Go ahead and do your thing. Have fun, but don't bring somebody else's fun down. Be aware that you are playing a cooperative game. It's not a competitive game. The universe is not built on competition. Survival of the fittest is just survival of the fittest. All right, whether that's a true state or not, but survival of the fittest doesn't mean that you have to be the alpha to survive. You can not be part of that game at all and still survive. Survival of the fittest means are you fit enough to cooperate with? Are you fit enough to accept cooperation? Are you fit enough and secure enough in who you are, what you believe you are, and how you believe you fit into the world around you, not just in the game, but in your life? Are you fit enough to be confident enough that no matter what somebody might say or try to inspire others to believe, you know what's true and you hold to that? Do not. Influencers are influencers. They're there for a specific reason. It's a bottom line. There's a margin involved here. There's money being made off of whether or not you are influenced. Uh, don't just let yourself be influenced. This is a power that only you can give. They'll try to say that they can take it from you, but it is a power that only you can give. Do not be swayed by the influencers. Try to see things for the reality that it is. There's money to be made in this. There's money to be made in Destiny. They want to make money. That's a business, and there's no wrong in that. But don't let yourself be built up on the idea that the raids are the end game. for me, my end game in this game state is just to get a synergistic build that I could take into most of the content that I play and survive and get through it and have fun doing it. Do I want to one-shot, phalanxes? Yeah, definitely. I would love to one-shot the boss. I get a charge when we one-phase bosses. I get excited when the two randos that I'm doing in a strike with figured out that, hey, look at the skulls. We can capitalize on those with this build, and they do it. And we basically one or two phase the boss. It's kind of difficult to do now in Destiny 2 because so many of the encounters have multi-phase bosses where they fall into a shield or an immunity that even if you do massive amounts of damage, all that extra damage is going to get lost because the boss's shields will click in, and then you have to fight a wave of enemies. It's how Bungie, and when you look, and that's the other thing too, is take a look at their game. Bungie loves fractals. They're all about the fractal experience. The strikes are a fractal of the whole game itself. Your bosses are time gated, essentially, by damage levels. So the game itself is time gated by seasonal levels. And the season is time gated by weekly resets. Um, you know, break it down. Start thinking analytically about it. Enjoy the fact that Bungie is not a dumb studio. They are very vocal. They are very out there. They're very learned. They're very well read. There's a reason why Cayde was called Cayde. There's a reason why Banshee is called Banshee. There's a reason why Zavala and Saladin exist in our game. Look those names up. Read the lore behind them. Not just the game lore, but the real world mythologies and legends that are involved in this game. You start to get a perspective of the game that goes beyond the narrative, that goes beyond the mechanics, that goes beyond the season's content. You can actually start to see what your true end game is in this state, is in this system. And just have fun. Thanks for hanging out.